There's a specific kind of hell that nobody warns you about. It doesn't come from suffering. It doesn't come from loss or trauma or any of the usual suspects. It comes from something much quieter, much more insidious. It comes from understanding. Not the surface level I get people bullshit that everyone claims. I'm talking about the kind of understanding that dissolves the boundary between you and them. The kind that lets you feel the architecture of someone's psyche while they're talking. The kind that shows you the exact wound driving their behavior, the precise fear shaping their words, the specific emptiness they're trying to fill. And here's what nobody tells you about. That level of understanding, it doesn't bring you closer to people. It exiles you, because once you can see the machinery operating beneath human behavior, once you recognize the patterns so clearly that people become almost predictable, you stop experiencing them as mysterious individuals and start experiencing them as variations on a theme. And that theme, it's always the same desperate song just played in different keys. There's no dramatic revelation, no lightning bolt, no single conversation that changes everything. It's more like you're at a party and someone's telling a story you've heard before. Not the specific details, but the underlying structure. The humble brag disguised as self-deprecation, the complaint that's actually a comparison, the vulnerability that's really a test. And you're nodding along because that's what you do. But internally, you're somewhere else entirely. You're watching them construct their identity in real time. You're seeing them decide which details to include, which to omit. You're noticing how their eyes flick to see who's paying attention. You're tracking the micro-adjustments they make based on the room's energy. You're not judging this. You're just seeing it. The way you might notice the wind moving through trees. Just observation, just fact. But then something shifts. You realize they don't know they're doing this. They genuinely believe they're just sharing a story, or being real, or opening up. They have no idea that every word has been pre-selected, every pause calculated, every emotion slightly performed for optimal impact. And the moment you realize they don't know, the moment you understand that people are unconscious actors in their own theater, everything changes. Because you can't ask them about it. You can't say, hey, I noticed you're performing right now. They'd be offended, defensive. They'd call you cynical or mean or overthinking it, because to them, this is real. The performance is their reality. The mask is their face. Arthur Schopenhauer spent his entire life trying to articulate this gap, this unbridgeable chasm between those who see and those who don't. He called it the will, this blind, driving force that puppets us all. But here's what most people miss about Schopenhauer. He wasn't being edgy. He was being precise. When he said humans are driven by will, not reason, when he claimed our intellect is just a tool that serves our deeper, unconscious drives, he wasn't making a philosophical argument. He was describing what he saw. What he couldn't stop seeing. Every achievement, just will wanting to feel superior. Every act of kindness, just will wanting to feel moral. Every conversation, just will wanting to be recognized, validated, confirmed, as real, not evil, not malicious, just blind, completely tragically blind. And once you see that blindness in action, once you watch people act out these drives while sincerely believing they're making conscious choices, empathy doesn't deepen. It curdles. The architecture of self-deception. Let me get specific because this is where it gets uncomfortable. You're talking to someone who's in a bad relationship. They know it's bad. They'll tell you it's bad. They'll list the problems, the incompatibility, the patterns that keep repeating, the moments that feel hollow. And they'll ask for your advice. They'll seem genuinely open to feedback. They'll say things like, I need to hear this, or be honest with me. So you are. You point out the obvious. This relationship is draining them. They've complained about the same issues for months. Nothing's changing. They should probably leave. And here's what happens. They defend it. Not aggressively, not obviously. But you watch it happen. You watch them subtly shift the narrative. Suddenly the problems aren't that bad. Suddenly there's context you don't understand. Suddenly they love this person. Suddenly it's complicated, and you realize they never wanted advice. They wanted permission to stay. They wanted you to validate their decision to remain in something that hurts them, because leaving would require courage they don't have. Or it would mean admitting they wasted time. Or it would force them to be alone, or, and this is usually it would require them to see themselves clearly. Because leaving would mean acknowledging, I chose this, I stayed in this, I ignored red flags, I prioritized comfort over truth, I was afraid. And most people would rather suffer than admit that, would rather stay in pain than face the specific flavor of their cowardice. This is what Schopenhauer saw everywhere. Humans don't want truth, they want comfort. And they'll construct elaborate intellectual frameworks to justify whatever makes them feel safe, important, or right. Your friend isn't really asking for advice. They're asking you to participate in their self-deception, to help them maintain the story they need to believe. And when you refuse, when you see through the question to the real need beneath it, and you won't validate the need, you become the problem. But it goes deeper than individual self-deception. There's a collective dimension that's even more suffocating. Jean-Paul Sartre, who was possibly even more exhausting to be around than Schopenhauer, spent decades obsessed with this question. Why do we need other people so desperately, even though other people are hell? His answer, because we can't confirm our own existence. We literally cannot know if we're good, valuable, real, or worthy without seeing ourselves reflected in someone else's recognition. This is why someone can accomplish something objectively, impressive, write a book, build a business, create art, and if no one acknowledges it, it feels hollow. Not just disappointing, hollow, like it didn't actually happen. This is why social media is so addictive. It's not the content, it's the confirmation. Every conversation is a negotiation of mutual existence confirmation. I tell you about my day, not just to inform others, but to confirm that my experience was real and significant. Others validate it, not because they care, but because they need me to validate theirs in return. We trade confirmations like currency. This is the game. This is what holds society together. Mutual recognition of each other's carefully constructed identities. And here's where you become dangerous. When you see this game so clearly that you can't participate in it with a straight face anymore. Someone tells you about their promotion. You see, they need you to be impressed. They need your envy, actually. Because if you're not envious, if you're just neutrally happy for them, something's missing. The status move didn't land. The achievement doesn't feel real. Someone shares their struggle. You see, they're not really looking for solutions. Mostly are not actually. They're establishing their identity as someone who overcomes things. They need you to witness their strength, their resilience. They need the struggle to be reflected back as noble. Someone asks your opinion. You see, they've already decided. They're just checking if you agree. If you do, you're wise. If you don't, you're not understanding the full picture. Every interaction is a request for confirmation. Every conversation is a negotiation of identity. Every relationship is a mutual validation pact, and you can't unsee it. You can't pretend you don't notice the need beneath every interaction. The hunger, the desperation, the please tell me I'm real that drives almost every human exchange. Here's what happens when you stop playing the game. First, people think you're depressed or going through something. They'll ask if you're okay. They'll seem concerned. Because your lack of enthusiasm, your quiet observation, your refusal to validate their performance, it registers as sadness or disconnection. And maybe you are disconnected, but not in the way they think. You're disconnected because you're watching the mechanisms. You're seeing the fear behind the bravado, the insecurity behind the confidence, the emptiness behind the busyness. And you can't pretend you don't see it. When someone brags, you don't hear the achievement. You hear the need to be seen as superior. When someone complains, you don't hear the problem. You hear the need to be rescued or pitied. When someone shares, you don't hear the story. You hear the identity there, constructing with it. And this refusal to take people at face value, this insistence on seeing the truth beneath the performance, this is violence. Not physical violence, but a kind of psychic violence, because you're denying people the one thing they need most, the confirmation that their self-image is real. Sartre understood this intimately. His whole concept of bad faith was about how we lie to ourselves, about our own freedom, our own responsibility, our own reality. We construct these identities, the victim, the hero, and we need others to confirm these identities as real. But when someone sees through our identity to the fear and freedom underneath, when they refuse to confirm our story, it's not just uncomfortable, it's threatening. It's existential. Because if our carefully constructed identity isn't real, then what are we? If the story we tell about ourselves is just a story, then who's doing the telling? If the mask isn't our face, then what's underneath? These are questions most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And you, just by existing, just by seeing clearly, force them to feel the edge of these questions. Not explicitly. Not verbally, but they sense it. They feel it in how you don't react the way you're supposed to. In how your validation feels empty because you're going through the motions. In how you seem present but fundamentally absent from the game they're playing. You become a mirror reflecting something they don't want to see, their own performance, their own desperation, their own hollowness, and mirrors that show uncomfortable truths, people smash them. The exile happens slowly, then all at once. First, the invitations become less frequent, not because people dislike you, but because you're awkward. You make things feel heavy. You ask questions that don't have easy answers. You don't laugh at jokes that everyone else finds funny because you're too busy analyzing why the joke worked, what insecurity it's targeting, what group, identity it's reinforcing. You become work, exhausting work, because people can't just be around you. They have to perform better, more consciously, more carefully, because they sense correctly that you're watching, that you're seeing, that their usual tricks don't work on you. Then comes the reframing. You're not insightful and you're negative. You're not observant and you're judgmental. You're not seeing clearly. You're overthinking. You're not being honest. You're being harsh. Your gift becomes your flaw. Your clarity becomes your problem. And here's the thing. They're not entirely wrong. Because there is something harsh about seeing through people. There is something judgmental about recognizing patterns. There is something negative about understanding. The hollowness driving most human interaction. The alternative would be to see all this and somehow still find it beautiful. To recognize the performance and celebrate the craft. To understand the desperation and feel compassion for it. To see the blindness and love people anyway. But that's not what happens, not usually. Not at first. What happens is disgust. Not the hot kind, not rage or contempt. The cold kind, the exhausted kind, the oh this again kind. You watch someone have the same argument they've had 50 times. You watch them make the same mistake in a different relationship. You watch them complain about a problem they could solve but won't, because solving it would require changing, and changing would require admitting they were wrong, and being wrong would threaten their identity. And you just can't anymore. Can't pretend it's new, can't pretend it's interesting, can't pretend you believe they'll actually change this time. Schopenhauer called this the movement from empathy to disgust. He noticed that compassion requires a degree of blindness. When you see too clearly, when you understand exactly why someone suffers and exactly why they perpetuate that suffering, compassion evaporates. Not into cruelty, into exhausted indifference. You stop caring, not because you're heartless, but because you've seen this episode too many times. You know how it ends. You know they won't change. You know their suffering is, on some level, a choice, an unconscious choice, yes, but a choice nonetheless. And you can't save someone from a choice they may know they're making but won't change willingly. So you withdraw. You stop engaging deeply. You keep things light, surface level, safe. You give people the validation they need, but you're not really there anymore. You're ghosting them while standing right in front of them, and eventually they notice. They sense the absence. They feel your presence without your participation. And they drift away. Not with anger, just with relief, because you were making them tired too. Making them feel exposed, making them confront dimensions of themselves they'd successfully avoided for years. The unbearable weight of other. People's unconsciousness. There's this moment, and if you've experienced this, you'll know exactly what I mean, where you're talking to someone and you can see the exact thing they're not saying, the thing they're avoiding, the truth they're dancing around, and you have a choice. Do you name it? Do you point directly at the thing they're hiding from? Or do you let them continue the dance? If you name it, you're too intense. You're making things uncomfortable. You're reading too much into it. Even if you're right. Especially if you're right. If you don't name it, you're complicit in their self-deception. You're participating in the theater. You're helping them avoid the very thing that might actually help them. Either way, you lose. Either way, you're alone with your seeing. This is what Sartre meant by condemned to be free. Once you're conscious, really deeply conscious, you can't delegate that consciousness to anyone else. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unsee what you've seen. And consciousness is a burden because it demands authenticity. It demands that you live in alignment with what you see, even when what you see makes life harder. Most people navigate life unconsciously. They follow scripts written by their culture, their family, their fear. They make choices without choosing. They live on autopilot and call it going with the flow. This makes them happy, not deeply fulfilled but comfortable, not actualized but stable, not authentic but accepted. You can't do that anymore. The autopilot is broken. You're flying manual. And manual flight requires constant attention, constant adjustment, constant energy. Other people are exhausting because you're aware of the work they're not doing. You see the conversations they're avoiding, the truths they're ignoring, the growth they're refusing. And you can feel the weight of all that unconsciousness pressing against you. Every interaction becomes a reminder. They don't see what you see. They don't question what you question. They don't struggle with what you struggle with, and you can't explain it to them without sounding insane. How do you tell someone, I'm exhausted because I can see the fear driving your need for validation? How do you say, being around you is draining because you're running from yourself and I can see the chase? You can't. So you just endure until you can't anymore. Until the weight becomes too much and you retreat into solitude, not because you hate people, but because unconsciousness itself has become unbearable. Here's something nobody talks about. The more you see through people, the more intimate your understanding becomes. And the more intimate your understanding, the more distance you need. This isn't a contradiction. It's the core mechanism. When you understand someone deeply, when you see their fears, their wounds, their mechanisms, the exact shape of their need, you know them in a way they don't even know themselves. You're closer to their truth than their closest friends, closer than their partners, closer than they are. But that closeness isn't connection. It's something else entirely. It's like being a surgeon. You can open someone up, see their organs, understand exactly how their body functions, identify what's wrong. But that doesn't mean you're connected to them. It means you're operating on them. There's intimacy in the knowledge, but it's a clinical intimacy, a distant intimacy. This is what happens when you see through people. You achieve this strange, perverse closeness to their reality, while simultaneously becoming unable to connect with them normally. Because normal connection requires a degree of equality, a mutual mystery, a sense that you're both fumbling in the dark together, both trying to understand yourselves and each other. But when you can see their machinery while they can't see yours, or worse, when they can't even see that they have machinery, the relationship becomes asymmetrical. You're not two people connecting. You're one person understanding another who doesn't know they're being understood. And that asymmetry is poison, not because you want it to be, but because it creates a fundamental imbalance that can't be corrected. They're trying to connect with you as a peer. You're experiencing them as a case study. They're sharing, hoping for recognition. You're recognizing patterns they don't know they're running. They're being vulnerable. You're watching them perform vulnerability. Sartre wrote about the look, that moment when you realize someone else is observing you, and suddenly you become an object in their world instead of a subject in yours. You lose your freedom. You become a thing to be perceived rather than a consciousness doing the perceiving. This is what you do to people, constantly, without meaning to. Your seeing turns them into objects of understanding, and they can feel it, even if they can't articulate it. They sense that you're not meeting them as an equal, but observing them as a phenomenon. This is why they drift away. Not because you're judging them harshly, but because being around you feels like being perpetually studied. And nobody wants to be a specimen, even if the study is compassionate. The cruel irony: the deeper you understand people, the less able you become to simply be with them. Knowledge destroys the innocence that connection requires. So let's go to the end of this. Let's follow this seeing all the way down. You see through other people's performances. You see through social games. You see through the need for validation, the construction of identity, the machinery of connection. You see through philosophy, itself as just another coping mechanism. You even see through your own seeing as potentially just defense, just wound, just another pattern maybe. Strip it all away. Deconstruct everything. See through every layer. What's left? For Schopenhauer, the answer was suffering. Raw, meaningless suffering driven by blind will. The only escape was negation, wanting nothing, needing nothing, withdrawing from the whole game of existence. For Sartre, the answer was radical freedom. The terrifying recognition that you're making it all up as you go, that there's no script, no essence, no predetermined meaning, just choices and the responsibility that comes with them. But here's what neither of them fully captured: what sits beneath even their philosophical frameworks. The body keeps needing. The body needs to feel safe, needs to feel seen, needs to feel like it belongs somewhere, needs touch, presence, recognition from other bodies. And no amount of seeing through the mechanisms of connection makes those needs disappear. This is why Schopenhauer's negation of will is ultimately impossible for most humans, and those who can make it possible are very rare. This is why Sartre kept getting into relationships even while writing about how they turn us into objects for each other. The body betrays the philosophy, every time. And that awareness doesn't make it less real, it just makes it more painful. So I'll ask you something I actually want to know. What's the loneliest truth you've ever seen? The thing you understand that you can't share because no one would get it? Drop it in the comments. Let's make a catalogue of unshareable truths. See you in the next one. Till then, stay dangerous, my friends.